So this is percentage of population absolutely certain that God exists. So I wanted to show you this to kind of show the importance of the SBC. You can see here that it's got the United States and it's also got Europe. And yellow is only 10 to 29% of the population certain that God exists. The tan color is 30 to 49%. The purple is 50 to 69%, and the blue is 70 to 82%. So for those who are just listening to the podcast only version, you'll see on this map that most of the U.S. is purple. So according to this survey, at least, most of the U.S., at least 50% of the population believes they are absolutely certain that God exists. So that is a wonderful thing. We're very happy about that. You can see kind of in New England, those numbers are lower. It's in the 30 to 49%. But in the South, states like Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Missouri, Oklahoma, and others, there is a dark blue 70 to 82% of the population that is absolutely certain that God exists. Now, if we go over to this other map that I've also got pulled up, again, for those listening on podcast, this is a map showing the location of Southern Baptist churches in the United States, according to the 2010 U.S. Religious Congregations and Membership Study. And you'll see all the red dots represent Southern Baptist churches. And you can see that the South is completely covered. It is almost an entire red blackout of these red dots that represent these churches in the SBC. So in the area where we see Americans still believe at a 70% or higher percentage that God absolutely exists, is all in the areas that are directly overlapping with the SBC church location map that we see here. So obviously, we're not going to pretend that the SBC is the only thing that we can credit to this high belief in God's existence. But I think it'd be foolish to also pretend that the SBC does not play most likely a large role in that very fact, because you can see in states like the West Coast where there's sparse SBC activity, there's also a smaller population that is absolutely certain that God exists. And so to Rhett's point in both the article and what he's already laid out for us here on this episode, there is some rich soil that is ready for these individuals, because 70% might believe that God exists, but 70%, unfortunately, I don't think 70% are regenerate believing Christians, especially church attending Christians. But there's a sort of cultural Christianity that is producing this ripe soil that is ready for churches to be revitalized and for a muscular Christianity to go in and actually seek out these people and present them with the gospel, and they're primed and ready for it. So if we're going to see any form of revival in America, I believe that it's going to start in the American South. Your thoughts, Rhett?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways you might look at that map. Somebody might look at that map and say, see, this is why we need to concentrate on the West Coast, we need to concentrate up in New England, because that people aren't believing, and there's an amount of truth there, but there's also the sense where we need to run where we're strong, and we have the infrastructure there with these churches that are declining or dying, where there's still maybe a faithful remnant of believers in that churches, and they have their facilities, and they have what you said there, which is super important. You have the rich soil of people who have at least a belief that God exists, even if they're not true regenerate, believing Christians yet. And so, I mean, the stats where I live, 8 out of every 10 people within a 5-mile radius of my church are not believers. They're not connected to Christ and His church, and yet, those statistics, I think, would bear out that 70% or more of them believe that God exists. And so what you have there is rich soul ready to hear the gospel and to believe and to follow Christ. And so I think you're exactly right. That's where we need to focus, not to the exclusion of other races, in the country, not to the exclusion of other places in the world. But I do think that we don't need to ignore our roots, and we don't need to ignore where there seems to be the rich soil that's ready for harvest there. And so, and just running where we're strong, where we have a number of faithful churches, and then also many other churches that just need faithful, godly, and bold leadership. There's a leadership crisis in the church right now. There's a pastoral crisis, pastoral shortage right now, and so we need to raise up men who can pastor and love these churches. One criticism of the American Reformer article was, that it was, some people saw it as more of a pragmatic argument of you're trying to use the churches just for a political project, and that's not that at all. I certainly wouldn't argue that the primary reason we ought to revitalize Baptist churches is to save the West necessarily. The primary reason we need to revitalize Baptist churches is because we love the church, and we love God, and we love His church. We love Jesus, and we love His bride, and it's for God's glory. It's for the good of those people who need shepherds, and it's for the good of those communities that need a strong and faithful gospel witness. That's primary. This article is in the context of a larger discussion about national revitalization. So that's why that I focused on it there. But that's certainly not the only reason. But those things integrated because Jesus told us to disciple the nations, including our own. And so that's the reason I believe we need to focus on these churches, particularly in the American South, where we have a strong opportunity, where we can run where we're strong.
Yeah, I agree. And I think something that I've been talking about in a lot of my conversations, both on the show and just in my personal life, is the fact that I really think that American Christians we spread ourselves too thin. I think we really have a beautiful heart for seeing people brought to Christ, but we focus so much on sending missionaries overseas, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. And I don't want any listener to misunderstand me. But I think that we've been so focused on trying to Christianize Africa and China and all these other places that our own country is no longer Christianized. And so what we're really talking about is we're talking about a tactical, I don't want to call it a retreat, but really just a regrouping and seeing, okay, where are we strong? Well, we can see that the Christianity is still strongest in the South. So maybe we should sort of find ourselves and regroup, find new strength so that we can then expand that circle, by going just one circle farther out from the nucleus at a time. Instead, I think that we try to spread ourselves so thin that we think that we can win by making sure that our troops are, out on the battlefield, the spiritual battlefield, completely outnumbered everywhere they go. And sometimes that's just not how you win a war. And the Bible is very clear that this is a spiritual war that we are living in. And so we need to think tactically like soldiers.